Hello, everyone. Welcome to this special edition of North and South podcast. Me and Kevin are just laughing because we were talking about our respective eye conditions just before recording, and I just clicked on the applause button instead of the pause button, which was quite funny because we're talking about our friend who's no longer with us, the legend, the local legend, the Sefton legend. That was Ralph James. Now, Kevin Donnellon has been on before. We spoke about Kevin's unique life. He is a thalidomide and a four-limber. That's his description. And he talked about his journey, going to school as a youngster, about going into the world of work, setting up a family, and, you know, his experiences around the world in different places, some interesting stories on New York. We also did another podcast about Kevin's political journey, which is also informed by his experiences in terms of disability rights, etc. But both of us are friends of the late Ralph James, who is sadly no longer with us. He died a few months ago, earlier in 2026. He was in his mid-70s. He'd been ill for a bit. He said to me, "Tim, I think I'm not well here." And then he found out he had cancer. It was given a 6-month time frame. And I think within 2 months, he got. I remember my last phone call with him. He was with his sister about a week before he died, but he'll be sadly missed. And he was a larger-than-life character and a really important member of the community. He was also very active politically right until the end. Kevin, how are you?
I'm all right, cheers. Thanks, Tim. Yeah, good to be back again.
Yeah. Been a while, hasn't it? But, you know, life's busy. Life gets in the way sometimes. So, I mean, my first memories of Ralph were as growing up. I lived around the corner from Ralph, and I just remember him being at things like there was a protest against the local tip planned on the railway. And I remember seeing him at like various protests, and he was always active in the community. And he had quite a unique voice, didn't he? And he wasn't afraid to say what he thought. He was always very, very highly educated, and he would come out with snippets of knowledge and information, which were like, you know, very, very impressive. I always remember being very impressed. What were your first experiences around?
Okay, well, I first met Ralph in the early 1990s, and I was in a party called the Socialist Labour Party, and it was run by a person called Arthur Scargill, that you might remember from the miners'
I remember Arthur,
yeah, fabulous Arthur. He was the leader of the Socialist Labour Party, and a lot of us had basically left the Labour Party over the Iraq War and, you know, Blairism, Tony Blair, and it was kind of like a protest party, really, as a reaction to Tony Blair and the neoliberalism that the Labour Party was going down. So I met Ralph and a lot of other really good comrades. And Ralph was, like you said, he was highly intelligent. He talked about any subject under the sun, apart from, I think, popular culture. Ralph did know the TV, and he wasn't really into like popular music or anything like that. But when it came to politics, he was a mind full of knowledge, and his sense of history is amazing as well. A massive knowledge of history, and he was fascinating to talk to. And he came round to my flat. We had a meeting in my flat with a few other comrades. And the first thing he noticed was the books on my bookshelf. And you read Nietzsche, and we got talking about philosophy and everything. And I thought, this guy's really interesting. And I found out that he'd been the first Labour councillor in Crosby during the 80s, right up until the 90s. Crosby has always been a Tory stronghold. There's always been a Tory MP, apart from one blip. Do you remember the blip? Shirley Williams.
Oh, yeah. Before my time.
Yeah, I know, I'm much older. Shirley Williams won by-election for the SDP. Like she called herself Baroness Crosby. But the seat went back to the Tories straight after when they had the general election. But Ralph was the first Labour councillor elected to Crosby. He got elected to the Manor Ward. And when I saw him, he had short cropped hair, quite smartly dressed. He always wore like a blazer. No, I never ever saw him wearing a tie, but he had the blazer and like, you know, an open collared shirt, clean shaven. But he was still kind of, I would say, eccentric then, because he was very passionate and he's a man of great principle. And his main passion was animals as well. He was a fabulous campaigner for animal rights. And he'd go down and protest at like the Grand National entry over their cruelty, the way horses were treated. And he was absolutely passionate about animals. And he loved at the time I had 6 cats in my flat, and he loved the cats. And I like anyone who likes cats. So we hit it off fabulously. He was amazing. And as I say, I was in the Socialist Labour Party for about 5 years, and we went on various demos. The best one was when we went to Aldermas and, the peace camp. I also did a Labour Party broadcast for Arthur Scargill. Sorry, a Socialist Labour Party broadcast for Arthur Scargill. So I went down to London and I had a script prepared, and they handed me a piece of paper and said, "You're going to say that." So they gave me the script. As I said to Ralph, it was kind of tokenism. I was like the token disabled person, because the whole broadcast featured different people from different minorities. So we had the black person, we had the Muslim, we had the Jewish person, we had the disabled person, a gay man, a lesbian woman. It was like right across the board. It was crazy. And we all had like less than 30 seconds to speak without one line. But Ralph agrees with me, it was tokenism, but I did it for Arthur, so. But I left the party, and a lot of comrades left the party, because it basically turned in on itself. There was so much factionalism. We had like Maoists and communists and Marxists, and they were all fighting each other, and it was crazy. Yeah. And Arthur, I love Arthur to bits, but he could be a bit of a Stalinist at times, and he was the leader, and there was no kind of it didn't feel democratic.
Yeah.
And I'll give you one example. We all had a meeting in Liverpool, and it was about women's rights. I won't mention who chaired it, but he's quite a well-known trade unionist. There was only one woman in the meeting, and the meeting was about women's rights, bizarrely. And he said to the woman, "Would you like to speak?" And she said, "I'd like to speak at the end, if you don't mind." And he said, "Yeah, okay." So we all had our say about women's rights. And then he said, "Right, I'm calling time, meeting's over." And then the woman put her hand up and said, "I'd like to speak." And he said, "Oh, no, I'm sorry, I've called time," which is ridiculous. It was a debate on women's rights. There was murder. And me and Ralph spoke up, and other comrades spoke up, said, "This is ridiculous. The one woman in the room, and you're not letting her speak." And he's saying, "I'm sorry, I've called time." And he's such a stereotypical trade unionist, a stickler for the rule book. And we had this debate about half an hour about whether she could have spoke. It's ridiculous. So the meeting broke up in disarray. The woman didn't speak. Absolutely insane. So after that, I was like, I've had enough. Me and a few other comrades left. And then I joined George Galloway's party. I can't remember what it was called. He's had that many parties.
Yeah.
I think it's called Respect. I can't remember. But that lasted 5 minutes. So then I gave up on politics, to be honest. And I lost touch with Ralph because he'd left as well. And I was kind of just sort of did my own thing, not really getting involved in politics.
Yeah.
Pissed off with the Labour Party, pissed off with all the parties really. And then Jeremy Corbyn came on the scene, and I went to hear him speak in Birkenhead when he was campaigning to be the leader. And the bookies had him down as 300 to 1 against becoming leader. And it was an amazing meeting. And then he became leader, so I immediately rejoined the Labour Party full of hope. And I went to the party conference in Liverpool at the M&S Arena, or the conference centre next door to it.
Yeah.
And I went to a fringe meeting, and Chris Williams was giving a talk about world peace or something like that. The audience was packed out, and I was sitting next to Jeremy Corbyn's wife. I didn't know who she was. I was just chatting to her, and a friend of mine whispered, saying, that's Mrs. Corbyn. And someone shouted at the back, Kevin. And I turned around, and there was this bloke with long white hair, a big white beard. And I just immediately thought of Father Christmas when I saw him. And I thought, it was this fella shouting. So I went over to him in my powered wheelchair in the interval, and I recognised his face and his eyes, and when he started speaking, his voice as well. I said, "Oh my God, Ralph!" And he said, "Yeah, comrade." It was amazing. I hadn't seen him for 15 years at least, and maybe more, 20 years. my sense of time scale was just off the wall because I'm 64 now, so I haven't got a clue about the time scale. But I've not seen it for many years. I said, "How are you doing?" And we got talking, and it was like we haven't really like been apart. We just started talking politics. It was like the good old days again. I told him I was like married with 2 kids, and he was like thrilled and amazed. And I invited him around to my house, and then we became friends again. And to talk about Ralph, he's just amazing, really. He was a very generous spirit as well. He loved our kids, and the kids loved him. And he loved it when the kids used to call him Ralphie, and he actually liked that. You know, here's Ralphie. Every time he visited, he always gave them like presents. It'd be like a book token, or at Easter time he brought around vegan Easter eggs. Or Christmas he brought little toys or vegan chocolate. It was absolutely fabulous with the kids. And then we'd sit in my office or in the kitchen and just talk for hours. It became even more eccentric as he got older. But he was still genuine, though. He was still passionate about what he believed. And he was a genuine bloke, so it didn't matter how he looked and his lifestyle. You probably know his house was kind of like taken over by animals. He fed all the neighbours' cats. And he was overrun by mice as well, but he didn't have the heart to like get rid of them. I remember me ringing up one day, and he was like almost crying on the phone. He'd actually stepped on one of the mice, and he killed it by accident, and he was devastated. But that was the kind of guy who Ralph was. A truly genuine bloke.
I think the interesting thing with Ralph as well is you've touched on a lot of stuff there, but he was very generous. He gave gifts to me lad. My lad's now 6, and he gave him gifts, again, vegan stuff and book tokens, and said, you know, I was always very touched by the way he was, and said, how's the lad doing, how's your son doing, he's the future, you know what I mean? He was a lovely guy. And as you say, you know, the way he was dressed and the way his house looked was secondary to his principles, and he was a very principled figure. And you know, you're talking about Arthur Scargill there, who heavily involved in the miners' strike, the leader of the miners' union, and you touched on the idea of like the divisions on the left and people getting frustrated. This isn't for me, this type of party, and it's a huge issue on the left, isn't it? These politics, small differences sometimes. But I think Ralph, he never ever gave up on the general drive to make the world a better place, even when he became frustrated with particular projects. And he was such an infectious character to talk to. He was.
I mean, everything he spoke about was politics. And he related to everything he did by his politics.
I think the other thing as well, I know Shirley Williams was in the Labour Party and then the SDP and later became the Liberal Democrats. To win that ward, he was very passionate about being a good councillor who voted the way he thought morally he should vote. And he wasn't into the whipping system. He was very much someone who wanted to vote the way he felt that he should, based on what his constituents wanted. And I think as well as that, he would have been someone who, if someone phoned him or messaged him with an issue, he was going to pursue that issue and you know, do his absolute best to resolve that issue. And so as a local councillor, it would have been great to have him because he would have responded and he would have done exactly what he was paid to do as a councillor without saying, oh no, I need to vote this way because I've been whipped. He wasn't into that. He was very much a principled person and would carry out his job to the best of his ability. And although he was in parties throughout his career, he would never have voted on an issue if he didn't agree with it. Yeah. And I think that's, you know, something that I think was what Ralph was all about, principles until the end, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, he was totally his own man. He wasn't a careerist. I mean, you know, he could have like been like a lot of people who are into politics and, you know, being a bit of a creep to the leadership and he like, you know, climb the greasy pole. You know, he might have become an MP and things like that, but that wasn't Ralph. As you say, he was a man of principle. And I'm glad he was like that. It was brilliant. And he helped me in terms of politics as well. During the time of the Corbyn years, I actually stood as a paper candidate in Ainsdale for the Labour Party. And I was quite happy to do that for Jeremy Corbyn's party. But it was at the time of the Brexit referendum. It wasn't the best time to get into politics, and it was so divisive. But I knew I had no chance in Ainsdale because it was basically it was a Lib Dem stronghold. Historically, it had always been either Tory or Lib Dem. It had never been, Labour. It was quite an affluent area, Ainsdale. And Ralph said, "Look, you've got to stand. You've got to be the candidate, and I'll help you." So he became my unofficial agent. The party gave me an agent who didn't really seem to be interested in working with me because I was only a paper candidate. But Ralph put his heart and soul into it, and he genuinely believed that we could win it. And he kind of annoyed a lot of people within the Labour Party in Ainsdale because he comes to the meetings and the planning meetings, and we had our headquarters and we hired a couple of rooms in the rugby club in Ainsdale, or it might have been a cricket club, but it was a sports arena anyway. And we had a couple of rooms, and Ralph would turn up. I remember once he had a bag full of letters, stick-on letters, and he was doing his own labels to cover his car, with loads of slogans for me, vote Kevin Donnellon. And people found him annoying that he was doing this, but I thought brilliant. He's the only one who was actually helping me in the campaign, and he really was a help. And he brought in other comrades from miles around, people like John Usher, who was in his 80s, and he was knocking on doors for me and giving out leaflets. For his age, he moved really fast. It was amazing. But he brought in loads of people from the whole of Merseyside to help my campaign. And because I was a paper candidate, they were concentrating on other wards, and they didn't really want my campaign to sort of take off. But it did. And we actually increased the Labour vote massively in Ainsdale. So it did become like a target seat the following election. And then it did become a Labour seat. And I'm not saying it's Labour because of what me and Ralph did. We certainly laid the groundwork. But even during the election night, me and Ralph were kind of confined to one corner of the hall in Southport Gym, where the election was held, for different wards in Southport. Yeah. And me and Ralph were in this corner, and Ralph kept saying it was the naughty boy corner because we were snubbed by the main party. We were kind of like an embarrassment to them. And I felt really angry with the party because most of them weren't Corbynites, if I'm being honest. But it was a good night. I didn't win. Part of me was kind of relieved because I was getting sick of the Labour Party by then anyway. I could see the writing on the wall where it was going. Jeremy was getting stabbed in the back and he was getting accused of being anti-Semitic when he wasn't. It was just all a big con. And also, people on the doorstep, when I was talking to them, all they were interested in was getting out of Europe. And they were saying, I'll vote for you, but I want to leave Europe. And it was all that mess, really. It was just a horrible time. So I was kind of relieved I wasn't elected in some ways. We did quite have a good turnout considering, it was never a Labour seat. But as I say, we were snubbed by the main party. Sean Halsall won for Labour in Southport in a ward that had never been Labour. And they had a big victory party in a hotel in Southport. And I wasn't invited. So Ralph went there and had murder with him saying, why didn't you invite Kevin? He was one of the candidates and he increased the vote percentage-wise more than the other candidates. So he didn't endear himself to the party. But we both more or less resigned from the party at the same time as soon as Corbyn stood down and Starmer took over. We spoke for hours on the phone. The conversations would last about an hour and a half, and it'd get even more depressing. We talk about the state of the Labour Party, where it was going, and what might have been, if Corbyn had become Prime Minister, and that had gone so far to the right. Going back to Ralph's principles, well, at that time, he had quite a serious heart condition, and he was really unwell. And the doctors wanted to perform heart surgery, and the operation was all lined up. But then Ralph found out that they were actually going to use tissue from a pig as part of the operation. I don't know whether it was the sutures or something to do with the operation where they were using parts from a pig.
Yeah, I think it was the valve itself, he told me, but continue.
Yeah, you might be right. I think it might be the valve. And he said, no chance, you're not putting a pig valve in my heart. It was essential to have this operation. His principles were so strong, and his passion for animals. He said no, and I really admired him for that. A few months later, they did perform the operation, but they got around it by not using the pig valve. But that's another example of how principled he was. I'll give you one funny example of his eccentricity. When I was talking about politics with him, and we were talking about, Gaza and the horrible things that were happening in Gaza, the genocides and that. And I was getting tired, to be honest, because the conversation was going on and on and on. I accidentally pressed a button on the phone, and it went beep. And Ralph went mad, and he started effing and blind, and he's saying, "You gobshite, you listening in, are you?" And I said, "Ralph, what's wrong?" He said, "It's Mossad." He said, "They always listen in." I said, "Mossad?" He said, "Well, it's either Mossad or MI6, but they work together." He said, "I know you bastards are listening in." And I thought, oh my God, this man's nuts. But I mean, it was funny at the time, you know what I mean? And I have to confess, the next time I spoke to him, I pressed the button deliberately just to kick off. And then I thought it was me, so I never ever did it again. But later on, I kind of I understood his paranoia. Because the way the Labour Party's been taken over by Zionists, most of the Labour Party are members of Labour Friends of Israel, or most of the MPs. A lot of the major MPs are paid by the Israeli lobby, and it is really sinister. And then when you think about other things that are happening, the prescription of Palestine action and the way that being called terrorists, they're arresting 90-year-old vicars, for God's sake. And, the average age, I think, is like a 60-year-old woman who's getting arrested as a terrorist. It is really horrific. So I stopped winding them up, and I kind of even though I've never that paranoid, I kind of understood his paranoia, to be honest. And he was
when he was at Greenham Common, he was having people went through a litter, and she had people tapping her on the phone. And I think the technology is better now, but you used to be able to tell if someone was listening in. But Ralph was kind of half joking, but also being serious, I think, when he said those kinds of things. But I think the thing with Ralph, and cards on the table, I don't eat meat. I'm pretty much vegan now. I'm gluten-free. I've got a genetic illness, so I watch what I eat. But I've always been concerned about animal rights, particularly factory farming. And although Ralph might have worn it on his T-shirt and would have been quite forthright in stating things, I mean, I don't mind if people eat animal products or use animal products. I'll say what I think. I won't ram it down people's throats, etc. But I think anyone who is aware of the conditions in factory farms, etc., most of the people who inspect those places and who inspect meat factories, etc., do not eat it. And the other thing with the Palestinian thing, when Ralph stood as an MP up in Central Sefton or Sefton Central in the last general election, 2024, he was kind of just making a stance really more than anything else. And he stood, and the Palestinian thing was a big thing for him. But I will say about the Palestinian issue, and again, there's a lot of culture war stuff with animal rights, with Palestine and all this stuff now. But the Palestinian people, without going into the history of it, to ethnically cleanse people from a land, to not give them a state, to completely disregard them, to label them all as terrorists, to somehow say that if you take over their land and you fight back, that makes you a terrorist. Regardless of all the culture war stuff and the polarisation about it, the situation on the ground there, Ralph always was very passionate about this issue, and I've read extensively about it. And I'll always say, we need to agree some kind of peace solution, two-state solution, whatever. But the way that Palestinians are just completely disregarded in the West, and the way that it's kind of assumed by governments that, we kind of need to cozy up to Israel after what happened to them in the past. And that all those fundamentalists in the Middle East, we need to be careful with them. We need to keep them at bay. the whole thing with Israel has caused all those problems. And it all goes back to the Balfour Declaration of 1917. I listened to William Dalrymple recently talk about this issue, who's a British historian. Brilliant. And he said, yeah, Hamas and Hezbollah, he said, they're, symptoms rather than the cause, and they're a hindrance. Moving beyond the war, we can't have these organisations behaving the way that they do. But to just disregard the Palestinians the way the media does in this country, and the way the politicians seem that it's more convenient to cozy up to Israel because of maybe our special relationship with the state. It really is completely reprehensible. And I just wonder what it will be like in the future when people look back at this time and go, wasn't that interesting? It's a bit like the way maybe people view the Kenyans during the Mau Mau massacre, or black South Africans before apartheid. And I don't know, but it really does sicken me how that is just brushed over. And I know there's a lot of people who are voicing up over it. But Ralph was always so passionate about that issue, because it is a left kind of issue, isn't it? People on the left do associate with the Palestinian cause. But it's a complete ulcer. It's on the world. It's not like anywhere else. And I think it is terrible. And I think the British and US angles on it are important because of the Balfour Declaration and because of the ongoing US support for Israel. And Ralph was always very, very passionate about that, wasn't he?
Well, he certainly taught me a lot about it. He removed thinking from my eyes in some ways. In some ways, I used to, swallow the official line that, Hamas were terrorists, they were the bad guys, and the West were like the moral ones. And it's all bullshit. There's no morality in this. It's like a massive, huge crime against humanity. And I don't think even it's a left-right issue. It's a human issue. And I think it's pure colonialism. And Hamas is a symptom of that colonialism. They grew up with that, the horror of what Israel has been doing to Gaza. I don't even think a two-state solution will work now, because what's left of the Palestinian state is just rubble. What we need to do is get rid of Israel, in the sense that we got rid of South African apartheid. That doesn't mean say we like bomb the crap out of Israel. We need to get rid of the system. I mean, does any country have a right to exist? Does Britain have a right to exist? Does America have a right to exist? America was built on genocide, genocide of Native Americans. Australia was built on the genocide of the Aboriginals. So no country in itself has a right to exist. But when I say get rid of Israel, I mean dismantle the regime in the same way that South Africa dismantled the apartheid regime. That's what I mean. And I hate the way Zionists are using Jews as human shields. Because if you criticize Israel or Zionism, you say, oh, you're being anti-Semitic. We're not being anti-Semitic. There are many, many Jews that are against what Israel are doing in their name. And they're getting the backlash from it, and it's wrong. In fact, if you look at the history of the early Zionists, they're actually very anti-Semitic. People like Herschel, who was one of the founders of Zionism, he was massively anti-Semitic, if you read his writings. And they use Jews as like human shields, and it's wrong.
I think as well as that, I think the anti-Semitic label against anyone who's concerned about Palestine, and wokeism used against anyone who is remotely more left than you. I mean, we can criticise identity politics till the cows come home, but it's almost like a new form of McCarthyism, particularly in the age of social media. I mean, I wrote an article recently about Facebook, which I know that you read, about the Facebook wars, but people are now hearing these repeated messages, just constant repeated messages on social media. We know what the print press is like in this country, the impact of GB News and things like that, and Talk TV, is there's a lot of culture war stuff now where anything that is remotely progressive is labelled as woke or anti-Semitic in an attempt to close down debate. But it's like McCarthyism. Now, McCarthy ultimately fell from grace because the media were covering him and showed him being drunk, and he went for the military in the end. Trump's gone for the military. Trump is a more insane character, and yet we're now beyond that. We're now in this post-truth politics where democracy, transparency, liberalism, just basic, we can critique those till the cows come home. They're under threat. And we now seem to be entering this kind of post-truth, polarized situation where the very nature of truth itself is under threat. Now, again, you can go back to the French. Foucault wrote after the war, and there was other French writers as well who wrote about like how language, discourse theory, all these things, the very nature of truth can be constructed. And in many ways, they were ahead of the time. Some of them were a bit far out and, post-structuralist kind of stuff, which is hard to prove, but they were onto something. And I think that we're very much through the looking glass now in terms of this pervasive media system where there's just so much nonsense out there. It's very hard to establish truth. And I mean, I don't really watch the BBC or listen to the BBC for news, but when the BBC considers a story serious, it's kind of taken seriously by the rest of the society. In the United States, January 6th is now, people will get gaslighted in an Orwellian way about whether January the 6th happened. And I really am terrified moving forward as to what the future holds with this kind of elite media system where a lot of powerful people like Elon Musk calling for the overthrow of the British government and no one says anything. It's like the world's run by Bond villains and it's happened slowly but surely, and now it's just considered as normal. And I know Ralph wasn't a big online person, but I remember telling him some of the stuff that I'd seen online, and Ralph's jaw used to hit the floor. Because as you said, he never really had a TV, but he was very, very, very concerned about the way the world was going. And, I think Ralph's legacy would be, what do we do about this? What does the left do about this? That might be something we chat about later. But Ralph would have been very, very concerned. If he was active online, I don't know what his view on the world would have been.
Yeah. I mean, he did, when you mentioned that when he stood to be a candidate in the last election, someone opened a Facebook account for him, but he never really, was part of that. Because the way his lifestyle, I'm not even sure he had electricity in his house, to be honest. Because I actually felt sorry for him, and I remember, to return the favour, because he'd been so generous with our kids and everything, for his birthday, I ordered a load of online pre-packed vegan meals for him, and a big box arrived with all these meals. And he rang me and he was like, really moved. He said, I really appreciate this. Thank you very much. He said, I have to take them around to my sister's though, because I don't have a cooker. So he had no means to cook them, but he cooked them at his sister's house. And when he used to visit, my wife felt sorry for him for some reason. She wanted to mother him, and we always got him loads of vegan biscuits, and we give him a packet of biscuits, and we talk politics, and he'd munch through the whole packet, and there'd be none left by the time we finished. But he was an amazing bloke. But he taught me a lot about politics, and you mentioned about woke and identity politics. I went through a phase of being very much involved in identity politics. When I joined the disabled people's disability rights movements, and I was almost evangelical about it. You know what I mean? And then I kind of realised I needed to move on from that and look at the wider issue, not just fight about disability, but fight about everyone's rights. The class struggle, if you like. And in some ways, identity politics is used by the right as the way to divide and rule. You've got one group against another group. And it's not even the left-right thing. It's so complex. And my philosophy is live and let live these days, provided you do no harm to anyone else. But people are so wrapped up in their own little identities sometimes that it is harmful to all the groups. You know what I mean? It excludes people as well.
It does. And I think this is a problem which is already an issue on the left, where people have these divisions. Like, I've been in trade union meetings. I always say the only thing worse than being in a trade union is not being in a trade union. Yuval Harari, who's an Israeli writer, he's very good on the Palestine issue.
Yeah.
But not quite like Ilan Pappé, but very good on the Palestine issue from an objective stance, certainly. And he says, to to become a good person, you need to know yourself, better yourself, and join groups that you sympathise with, that you feel can make a change or make an impact. And I always say that when I start getting frustrated with groups, because there's always a compromise about going into a group. But you've got to think about the bigger picture. So when in 2017 or 19, when basically Nigel Farage said he wouldn't stand anywhere where the Tories were standing over Brexit, and then they won that election. The right can do things like that when it's needed, and I think that's one of the problems with the left, with identity politics and the politics of small differences, when people start shouting at each other. And we've seen multiple examples through history in the 1930s where you had communists and fascists working together to get rid of the ones in the middle. And it's almost like this thing where, you know, like a mafia figure, if he feels offended, he'll pick on the weakest person in the room to show how tough he is, kind of thing. And it's almost like the left, they almost seem to need to prove their credentials by having a go at someone else on the left who's not that different to themselves. And it's a real problem, isn't it? And there's so much example of it. And,
I mean, when your party was formed, you know, Jeremy Corbyn, and I thought, oh, brilliant, we've got another crack of the whip. And I started to get hope again. But because of identity politics, the party just ate itself alive. You know, there were so many squabbles over stupid little issues, and the conference was embarrassing. I never got tickets because of whatever sort issue was. I never got invited to the conference, but I watched it online, and I was cringing through most of it. It was so petty and so divisive, and it was just eating itself alive. And me and Ralph became totally disheartened. In fact, the last time I saw Ralph was at St George's Hall when Corbyn and Sultana they tried to put on a united front at St George's Hall, which he did successfully for that one meeting, and then it all kicked off again. But it's just my hope is quickly dashed because of your party. It's just so sad. I mean, people on the outside, they're not interested in these squabbles about identity. They want to know, you know, what we got, you know, bread and butter issues, how they're going to pay the bills and things like that. So, you know, it was sad really that when the time Ralph died, that, you know, your party had basically collapsed. It's gone nowhere really.
Your party summed up that kind of leftist issue that we sometimes see. I know Ralph very much a principled man, but he was willing to go into groups and try them out and feel them out. And that kind of thing of a united front and a general grouping whereby other parties can sign up for things, maybe not agree with everything. And I always remember going to see the Ken Loach film, The Spanish Civil War. You know, the Scouser goes to fight in the Spanish Civil War, Land and Freedom. And they had a special showing on at Crosby at the Plaza years ago. And Ken Loach was asked to come, but he couldn't make it. But he just said, he sent a statement and it was read out. And he said, the one thing I wish for is this sectarianism on the left to end. And I think that's very much something that Ralph would want as well. I mean, I went to Labour meetings with Ralph, local wars meetings after Corbyn got in, and we went there, and you've got the old guard there who were trying to defend their positions. I went to like local area meetings with Ralph as well, where Peter Dard, the MP, would sometimes turn up. He was in Corbyn's shadow cabinet for a while in the Treasury, shadow Treasury, and he was there and people were talking, and there was very much a kind of a Corbyn floor, people who joined because of Corbyn and were hoping things would move forward. And in many ways, I think Corbyn and Conservatives as well have been very much victims of Brexit. I think the Brexit wars have destroyed politics the last 10 years. Cameron was utterly destroyed by it. May was destroyed by it. Johnson was destroyed by it. Liz Truss, I don't even know what to say about her. I think to a degree, Rishi Sunak was destroyed by Brexit. And I think that Keir Starmer has as well. Yeah. And it's caused a lot of concerns for everyone, hasn't it?
Yeah, it totally destroyed trust in politics generally. And it's put a lot of people off. And it's just totally insane. And the rise of Farage, and that really frightened me, the rise of fascism, and the far right is on the rise. And that we need an electable party on the left to counter that fascism. but I can't see the Labour Party doing that at this present time. Whether Andy Burnham will, who knows? It remains to be seen, but I'm not that optimistic.
Yeah.
But
I read a very good article this morning by the MP for Norwich, is it Clive Lewis? And I've read quite a lot recently. He said, "This is what Burnham should do," and he come out with things. There is a lot of really good ideas out there, I think, that could unite the left, that are fairly low-hanging fruit. And I think Burnham would need to be very brave to do it. The hardest thing, I think, being a leader is to have access to what's going on and people around you who are feeding you the right info. I think Keir Starmer, ultimately, in the end, I think it's become an impossible job, PM, in this country. And I don't think it's just Brexit. I just think it's around the time of Brexit, Trumpism, Cambridge Analytica, the media landscape has changed. And I don't know about you, but I go on Facebook groups locally, and it's literally like 1938 Germany. Some of the admins, some of the stuff I'm seeing, it's terrifying. And I'm very, very worried about it. And I think if Ralph, I used to say things to Ralph about what I'd seen online, and he'd just go, what? And he would shake his head because it is very worrying. And I think that Ralph even said to me, he said, I would have gone to Runcorn and campaign for Labour if I'd have known that Sarah Potion was going to win that election. He said that to me like last year. I mean, she's got to be one of the most horrible people in the whole chamber. I mean, Farage and Tice aren't nice people, but she's like, I think she's just a strange one, horrible person. You know, on the left, we need to disagree, but we also need to know what our united appeal is. I'll give you an example. You know, if Burnham come in and goes, listen, I'm not happy with this Palestine thing. I think we need to be a bit more sympathetic to what's going on the ground. This thing about, you know, anti-Semitism is where we stand. Get it out there, stick it out there and say this is what we're going to do. The thing about I'm kind of borrowing from Clive Lewis to a degree here as well. Like, say what's gone wrong with privatisation. So there's our plan for privatisation and what's gone wrong. We're not going to nationalise everything all at once, but there's a long-term plan. And say to people, my job is to try and make your lives better financially. It's what we're going to do that. And again, it's not easy, and you'll get ripped apart. But there are some good ideas out there.
We need to move away from Thatcherite liberalism, which we've had since Thatcher. You know, they keep going on about the bloody markets. Who cares about the markets? We need to start thinking about people. That's what I believe, definitely. And it's not about being like extreme left. You know, Corbyn was actually quite moderately left if you look at the leaders in Europe. Some of the proposals that he had in his manifesto were actually very popular with people. The individual policies he had. If you ask the average person on the street, he'd say, "Oh yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, utilities should be in public control. We should nationalise the railways. We should nationalise the water industry. I mean, the water industry, that's a monopoly to print money. I mean, if I'm not happy with North West Water, I can't say, oh, I'll have Thames tomorrow or go over to, I don't know, South East Water. It's just obscene, and the corruption is endemic, and we need braver politicians to stand up to all that, and it can be done. It's not like impossible, but I haven't got much hope, to be honest, but we'll have to wait and see. I mean, the one good thing when Burnham gave that speech, there was not a bloody Union Jack in sight. I was sick of watching Labour politicians always speaking in front of Union Jacks, but they're not doing that now. They've dropped that, because I noticed the Education Secretary on Channel 4 News wasn't sitting in front of her flag like she normally does. So we might be moving in the right direction. I mean, there's nothing wrong with nationalism, providing it's not like the fascist kind of nationalism, patriotism, sorry. But my idea of patriotism is looking after your own people in terms of, you know, providing a health service, providing an education system, providing a welfare state. That's my kind of patriotism. I'm not blaming it on immigrants. It's blaming the billionaires and the corrupt bastards who are controlling the world. You know, immigrants aren't taking food off your table. It's the billionaires who are stealing all the assets and the wealth.
I think it's interesting as well. Billy Bragg wrote a great book in 2007 called The Progressive Patriot. And to a degree, the fella from Liverpool, the writer who wrote the 2012 Olympic opening ceremony.
Frank Boy.
Yeah, Frank Cotter Boyce, great guy.
Yeah.
He featured the NHS in the opening ceremony, and a lot of the Tories went mad.
Yeah.
But it's about saying, here's what we stand for. Here's what our our patriotism is about. Because you've literally got people like Kemi Badenoch, who's a Twitter freak, who's sympathetic to Trump. You've got Farage, who's sympathetic to Trump and Putin. And then the waving flags around, taking £5 million off a crypto billionaire in Thailand, and then they call themselves patriots. But I think the left need to get those messages across better. And I think one of the things which you've touched on is about the bread and butter issues. The Byline Times has been very critical of Starmer, but they have had articles of all the things Labour have done behind the scenes. And I just said, I don't know any of these. And it's that communications thing. I mean, by the end, I said like, Starmer's got to go because of A, B, C, D, E, and all that. And I think you can call it McSweeney or whatever, but there's some of the stuff which Labour had done behind the scenes or had tried to get through. It wasn't even out in the media, and we know the media landscape is against any attempts at being even moderately progressive. But we have to overcome that, our messaging more, and I think that like someone like Mamdani in New York, Polanski to an extent. Now, Polanski and Corbyn, again, if you look at what Polanski's advocating, what Corbyn advocated, it's kind of like mildly social democratic. And then you've got like even liberal papers saying that they're extremists, and you think, well, okay, Polanski might say the odd thing which might alienate certain people. He's not perfect. Corbyn was the same. He wasn't really a communicator or media savvy. But then we pick on those issues while letting the right get away with blue murder. And I think that's one thing the left has to be better at, controlling that narrative more.
Not be frightened of the media class, the billionaire ownership who own the media, not be frightened about what their opinion is. You know, we need to educate people more about what's happening in the world, because they're getting their news information from the billionaires, and it's in their vested interest to not change the status quo, to perpetuate this neoliberalism. And as I say, he's quite moderately socialist. He's certainly not extreme left. And I don't think even Corbyn is. He's just a man of principle, and the right hate that. And that's it. You know, we can beat them by sticking to our principles and being brave, and having a clear sort of ideology. That's the problem with Starmer. He had no ideology. He was never a Labour man. He only joined Labour a few years ago. He was never Labour. Blair certainly wasn't Labour either. His ideology was neoliberalism. Thatcher said New Labour was one of their best creations. She used to boast. So,
absolutely,
But getting back to Ralph, before this interview, I was thinking about some of the things that we did together. As I say, he did a lot for me, in that local election. Even though it didn't win, he really campaigned his heart out for me. When Ralph kind of like got a passion about something, it might be a small thing, he really focused on it. So I remember he wanted to start a campaign against, fake grass, the astroturf that people have in the gardens. He wanted that banned because it destroyed insects and it destroyed the environment. And another little bee in his bonnet is that, in supermarkets, you have these like security tags, and they're like little pins with like round ends. He saw them all over the floor in Tesco one day, and he thought these were highly dangerous. He thought children could stand on them, or guide dogs could stand on them. And he said to me, "We should get these banned." And I'm thinking, "Oh, okay, Ralph." And he said, "I'm going to write to the Echo about this. That these are dangerous." And I thought, well, it's not something I'm interested in. I've never even thought about it before. I'm sure no one in the world has still on one of these pins. I don't think they're as dangerous as he made out, but he had this thing that they were dangerous. As a favour, he said, "Come with me to Tesco's in Litherlands, and I've got a journalist lined up. He's going to interview us." I thought, oh, God. I thought, yeah, all right, I'll do it. So we met this guy in the car park, and he had a video camera. I didn't know he was going to film us. So Ralph gives this speech about how dangerous these pins were, and I'm sitting there looking embarrassed. And then he says, "What do you think of these pins?" So I just have to think of something quick, because I'm not really asked about these fucking pins. And I'm thinking, well, if I run over one in my wheelchair, it might deflate my tyres. Anyway, it was in the Echo, right? And I read the comments, and you can imagine how bad they were. Oh my God, they were really bad. But but that's like an in joke with me mates. Whenever I mention Ralph, he'd say, "How are the pins? How are the pins?" But
that's what he was like.
But apart from that, I mean, he was absolutely brilliant in many ways. He was highly knowledgeable, and what I liked him about, he wasn't like full of humility, but he wasn't arrogant. He was intelligent, but he didn't put people down when they weren't as intelligent as him. So he didn't have that arrogance, and I don't know that much about his background. I mean, I watched the podcast he did about his father and what he did in the war, and that was fascinating. But I think Ralph came from quite a well-to-do background, quite a middle-class background. His middle name is Norgate, Ralph Norgate James. So he's kind of like, he didn't come from a working-class background, but it was utterly sincere and passionate. And he was, a true socialist in the true sense of the word. And he wasn't doing it, for his own glorification. Even though he was like really ill, he was a trooper. He went on as many demos as he could, even when he was seriously ill. And every Saturday, the anti-genocide marches. I've only been on 3 of them, much to my shame. But I saw Ralph at every single one of them, and he was a trooper. Even though some of the conversations were sure, like an hour and a half long, and sometimes it'd be hard to get a word in. I mean, I speak a lot, but believe now, I get a word in with Ralph. But I do actually miss him now. I really do. But,
Well, when I open the windows in the morning, I can still see his house, and I just have a little moment each morning. But his conversations were fascinating, and the 2 podcasts I did with him, I did one about his political views just before he stood as an MP in 2024. We talked about the left, a bit like how me and you discussed the left and the future of the left and where the left is, in a way, because you couldn't talk about Ralph without discussing the general left. And I then did that other one about his dad in World War II. Now, he did both of those recordings. He had notes in front of him, and he just looked at me and didn't look sideways for the hour and whatever, and spoke perfect English without any hesitations, no ums or ahs. Beautiful, eloquent. And his grasp of history, his memory, his grasp of politics was phenomenal. And we planned to do ones on the Holocaust. He went to Auschwitz. He recommended the fantastic documentary Show It to me many years ago, which is still one of the most powerful things I've ever seen. I've watched it twice. It's on for 9 hours. And we had plans to talk about animal rights in podcasts. And I wrote a little piece on Facebook, which I know you commented. And I would like to think maybe, I know Ralph is an atheist, but maybe one day we'll be able to sit down and me and Ralph could finish some of those podcasts in another place. Who knows? But he was a great guy.
He was. I mean, a couple of other little funny things as well. There's bees and his bonnets. He has some crazy ideas. But like one idea, you mentioned Ken Loach before. We went to a film at the Plaza in Crosby, and Ken Loach was there. He whispered to me, "Ken Loach should do a film about you." I said, "Oh, get lost." He said, "Yeah, he should. And we could just call it Kev. And it'd be a nice end to his career. It'd be like bookends. He started off in Kez and finishing with Kev." Oh, fucking hell. He said, "I'm going to tell him." I said, "No, don't, Ralph." He said, "Yeah, he loved that idea." So he grabbed Ken Loach and he said, "This is my mate, Kevin. And he's a great comrade and he's a fabulous socialist. And he's had an amazing life. And I think you should do a film of him." He said, "Think about it. You could have bookends of your films, Kez to Kev." And he's just looking at him thinking, "Who's this fella?" And he said, "That's an interesting idea." He said, "But I've got such an awful lot on at the moment. I've got too many projects on. I'm going bright red in the face." And I'm thinking, "Fucking hell, I'll shut up." But, and another idea, not relating to me, thank God, but the other idea was that horrible fascist, Tommy Robinson. His name is one of his many names, Yaxley Lennon. Ralph was saying, "How dare you use Lennon's great name?" He said, Yoko Ono needs to know about this. We need to write to Yoko Ono and get her involved in the campaign against fascism. I said, okay. I just went along with him. He's like, can I use your computer and we write a letter to Yoko? So between me and him, we managed to get Yoko's secretary's address, email, or the gatekeeper of Yoko. And between us, we composed this big long letter to Yoko about Yaxley Lennon, saying he shouldn't be using John Lennon's name in vain. So we sent it off, but nothing came of it, thank God. But at least he was full of ideas, do you know what I mean? And he was, and I loved him for that. I loved his eccentricities. I loved everything about him, really, to be honest.
Yeah, I remember getting a book once from Amazon, and it was I've been recommending it on this like Stoic podcast about dealing with difficult situations, and it was Ulysses S. Grant's biography. It was huge tome. So I started reading it, and it was a little bit too detailed for me. And I was going to just take it to the charity shop, you know what I mean? And typical Ralph, he was walking out the door after we'd recorded the podcast, and he saw it on the ledge. And he said, "Oh, Grant." He said, "What are you doing with that?" I said, "I was going to take it to the charity shop." He goes, "Oh, can I have it?" He said, "I'd love to read all about Ulysses S. Grant." That was the depth of his knowledge and his interest in the world, his history, his politics. His passions, and for him, the personal was the political in every way. He wanted to make the world a better place. I sometimes disagreed with Ralph, and that's one of the things on the left which can sometimes be difficult. But he was always very respectful in our disagreements, and as you say, he was a lovely guy. He wouldn't, I've been in a few meetings where he got a bit shirty, but that was because he felt like people were behaving in a way which wasn't conducive to, how they should. Let's put it that way.
I mean, he annoyed me sometimes, I'll be blunt. I mean, that's why we stayed friends, to be honest, because we could fall out. Not even fall out, we could have disagreements. And then, we'd talk again. We'd be best of friends again. We never really fell out. It could be hard work sometimes. Then again, I am. Because, when I get on my soapbox, I can really piss people off. So, but in terms of politics, we agreed with almost everything, to be honest. There wasn't anything major that we disagreed on.
But yeah, I think remembering Ralph, I think he's one of those people, like Joe Hill, the Swedish trade unionist who was shot in the United States for being in a union and singing songs. They charged him with some nonsense, didn't they? And there's like the famous folk song written. A few people have covered it through the years as well. Apparently, the last thing he said was like, "Don't mourn, unionize," and I think that or organize. And I think that if I would remember Ralph when he was approaching his end and he knew it, he would say to you, "Don't mourn. Let's keep this going. We need to make the world a better place." I think that's a fitting way to remember Ralph, isn't it?
And Ralph didn't want a funeral. He never had a funeral. He didn't want any fuss. And in some ways, I kind of thought that was a shame, because it would have been packed out wherever he was buried. It would have been packed out, but he didn't want anything like that. Yeah, and that was his humility in a way. It wasn't about Ralph. It wasn't. He didn't have a massive ego in that sense.
There you go. Right. Thank you very much, Kevin, for that. It was like a walk down memory lane, but it's also a chat about the current situation in the world and the future. But I think that's how Ralph would like it. So thanks very much for your fantastic memory and your insightful comments. And we've spoken about a lot there, including wider politics and the left, but that's how Ralph would have liked it, isn't it? So thank you very much for your time and best of luck for the future. And hopefully we'll do another recording soon.
A pleasure. Cheers, Tim. Thank you. Bye.
No worries. Cheers, Kev. See you later. Ta-ra.